Thank you, Speaker. Sponsor, does the change that was made at all impact the portions in this legislation related to environmental, social, and governance, ESG?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not mentioned in this bill, so no.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. So in the change that was made, that was not mentioned?
Chairman Zachary.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear you. Say it again.
Representative Pearson.
In the initial legislation, and I believe this came before us, it was mentioning environmental, social, and governance, ESG, as a part of the legislation. You said that's been removed?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, that's never been part of the legislation.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. So can you explain this legislation for us one more time, sponsor?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a consumer protection bill.
Representative Pearson.
You're so eloquent and a man of so many words when you're in the well. Outside of it, not so much. Look, I, again, don't... To what? Okay, your objection to what? You just want to say something. Look, mentioning things in this way, that a financial institution shall not deny or cancel its services to a person or otherwise discriminate against a person in making available such services or terms of conditional services based on political opinions and speech, religious beliefs, and things like that, I think are important. But as I understand it, the use of rating, scoring, analysis, tabulation, or action that considers a social credit score based on political opinions, based on religious affiliations, and engagement in these other ways is something that you are seeking to prevent people from doing. If you go to H, I don't know if you've read your legislation at all, if you've changed it, but the person's failure to meet or commit to meet or expected failure to meet any of the following, as long as such person is in compliance with applicable state or federal law. One is environmental standards, sponsor, including emission standards, benchmarks, requirements, or disclosure, sponsor. Two is social governance standards, benchmarks, or requirements, including environment or social justice, sponsor. Three is corporate board or company employment composition standards, benchmarks, requirements, or disclosures based on characteristics protected under Title IV, Chapter 2021, and 4 was policies or procedures requiring or encouraging employee participation in social justice programming, including diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Is this the wrong piece of legislation that I have before me?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you give me the bill number?
Representative Pearson.
It's the bill that you're currently on, HB2100 by Zachary. It's on the board there, too.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is the bill we're discussing.
Representative Pearson.
Yes. So, again, you haven't read your legislation, which is really problematic that you're asking for us to pass it.
Well, there's objection.
Objection?
There's objection. Chairman Faison, what's your object?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is the third time the gentleman from Shelby County has assaulted the presenter of this bill and his character by saying he doesn't know his bill, by saying he's not read his bill. That's assaulting his character that he doesn't know what he's doing up here. Objection.
So, is it just an objection, or are you going? Chairman Faison.
Mr. Speaker, I say we put it on the board.
Chairman Faison, I understand, Chairman Faison, you have to make an objection based on some rule if you are going that route. Chairman Faison. Chairman Faison, you can do some rule or ask him to get back on the bill. It's whatever motion you decide to make here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would call the gentleman to order of the bill and not the character of the presenter.
Hey, Representative Pearson, stick to the legislation or the amendment on the message calendar. Representative Pearson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. this legislation, which I asked about several times if it had anything to do with ESG, which means environment, social, and governance. I asked the sponsor of this legislation whether his bill, HB2100, had anything to do with that, and the sponsor responded that it did not. And so from him saying that he did not have legislation before us related to ESG, I could only, as I'm sure all of you have, come to the conclusion that the sponsor's bill and the sponsor's reading of it had not yet occurred. So that's all I was saying, but I appreciate what you're saying. I'm still against this legislation because I believe that it is important that we prioritize the issues of environment, of social, and of governance when it comes to corporate entities. Over 95% of the Fortune 500 use these standards for their financial institution. And so having legislation that tries to restrict banks from being able to use this in their own tabulation, I think is wrong. I think it is unjust. I think it is not in line with any of the best practices as it relates to financial institutions. And I would encourage each of you to read the bill and to see exactly what I'm talking about here. And when asked questions, I would encourage that you just answer the question so that we can have dialogue, as many of your colleagues have done, sponsor. Thank you, Speaker.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I was asked if environmental social governance scoring was in this bill, and that is, again, not mentioned in the legislation. And in reading the legislation, you will not find the terms environmental, social, and governance scoring. And so that's what I was asked about. So I simply replied to your question based on you asking me about environmental, social, and governance scoring. So if you read the bill, then you will see then you will clearly see that that's not in the bill because those terms are never mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.